Hi, this is Steve Michelotti of the Azure Government Engineering team. I'm joined here today by Alex Frankel, Program Manager on the Azure Governance team. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
So we are here today to talk about Azure Blueprints in Azure Government.
That's
now,
right.
Some of our government customers may already be familiar with Blueprints, but some of them may not be. So why don't you give us a little bit of intro, like what are we talking about here with Blueprints?
Yeah, so we're not talking about an Excel spreadsheet for sure. So this is a native packaging construct for what we call Azure artifacts. So those can be things like Azure policies for auditing certain behaviors or restricting certain behaviors. RBAC, identity management, of course, is really important there. And then your ARM templates, which is your infrastructure as code. So describing what resources do you want in a subscription or a resource group, what properties that you want them to have.
Okay, so this is really going beyond an Excel checklist, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly when you mention Azure Policy, that's a service we have in government, which by itself is really powerful.
Yep.
But the fact that Blueprint is packaging it up, leveraging those features in a cohesive, organized way is really powerful.
Right, yeah. Policy is a crucial piece to governance in Azure, whether it's in government or in the public cloud. But what we found is that there's a few more things that you need to really construct a proper environment. And those are those other two pieces, so the RBAC assignments and the ARM templates for the infrastructure itself.
Okay. All right, so why don't we dig into this a little bit more? Let's talk a little bit about the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah. So we did a lot of research in this space. We spent like between 3 and 6 months looking at, why is Azure hard to adopt at scale, essentially. So what are the challenges that you start to hit when your environment spans many subscriptions? You have hundreds of app teams using the same Azure tenant, and what we found is that there's this emerging role in pretty much every large organization that it's the cloud architect, and they are the ones who are essentially stewarding these application teams to the cloud to make sure they're using the cloud in the right way. We all went to the cloud with this dream of sort of self-service, right? You could just go into Azure, grab whatever infrastructure that you want, stand up your applications, and you're done, you're good to go. And the reality of that is that you do need to really have a knowledge of the platform to consume the cloud in the right way. And the cloud architects are emerging as that role, and they work with all the app teams. And they're experts. They know exactly what they're doing when it comes to Azure, but they have become the bottleneck in terms of getting these application teams onboarded, getting their subscription set up, just so that they can start to actually deploy their code into Azure. And so we found it was taking anywhere from sort of 3 to 12 months for an organization or an application team to go from 0 to production application in Azure. And so what we're trying to do with Blueprints is how can we make that process faster so that when an app team comes to this cloud architect, they can have a blueprint that's ready to go for that use case. So they are starting to develop a library of these blueprints for different purposes so that they basically have front-loaded all the engineering work for getting subscriptions stood up, and they just have to apply this blueprint to the environment, and they're ready to go.
So it sounds like we will provide some out-of-the-box blueprints, but also an enterprise or an agency can customize and make their own blueprints.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll walk through this in the demo. So you can start with a blueprint from scratch, and we'll show what that sort of experience is like. But we also have a set of built-in blueprints, some of which are just targeted at sort of getting you started with blueprints faster, understanding the concepts and the types of things that can be brought into them. But the really exciting piece are these blueprints that are built for certain compliance certifications. So today we have the ISO 27001 blueprint, both for setting up sort of a shared services environment, and we'll talk about this in more detail, as well as one for setting up individual workloads. And with that, you can deploy all your infrastructure and also get a really good jumpstart on meeting those ISO compliance controls, which we know is sort of a baseline. We know many need to get certifications on top of that ISO certification, but often that's a really good place to start.
So that's a hugely important point for our government customers, because you mentioned ISO, but then there's also FedRAMP Moderate, FedRAMP High. Maybe some customers need CJIS. So to be able to have blueprints for each one of those is very critical. For
exactly, and it's all on the roadmap. And Azure itself as a platform has to meet all of these compliance standards, right? So we have the expertise internally for what are the checkboxes that you need, what are the controls that you need to meet for all these different certifications. And they are actually the ones that we're working with to build out this library of built-in blueprints.
And I think that's another important point. It's one thing, just because you're deploying your app to Azure, you're deploying into a compliant environment, that doesn't mean you're automatically compliant. You also need to make sure you're enforcing on your own artifacts and what you're deploying.
Exactly. What my coworker describes that as the shared responsibility model, right? So you've met some of the controls by default. There are a set of technical controls that you are responsible for meeting after that. And then there's a set of people and process controls that you are also responsible for. There's only so much we can do in that capacity, but we do think we're giving you a really solid head start there.
Okay, great. All right, let's keep going. So what do we have next here?
Yeah, so this is really at a high level what a blueprint is, and we only need to touch on this for a minute, but it's taking these core pieces that we're calling artifacts, so that's RBAC, policy, and ARM templates, packaging that into a blueprint. It's called a blueprint definition before you're actually using it for your deployments. That blueprint definition itself can be managed and versioned. So you're not going to be done with compliance on day one. You're going to be constantly evolving what it means to be compliant, what it means to be governed. You may be adding new resources. You may be adding new policies. So we give you the pieces to version that out and understand which blueprint versions have been applied to which subscriptions. So that's what we mean when we say managing blueprints. And then once you've done the hard work of codifying your intent of what an environment looks like in a blueprint, now you can start to really scale out, because as any new subscription comes online, you just apply a blueprint to it. And so you can really start to scale out your use of Azure that way.
I think this concept of enforcement and continually monitoring what you have is hugely important. Again, because I'm in the government space, I think about how far blueprints come from the Excel spreadsheets, and even some of the ARM templates. If you use an ARM template, okay, you were compliant on day one, but as your infrastructure evolves beyond the ARM template, how do you enforce that? And the fact that we now have Azure policy in there is hugely important.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about one other feature as we're walking through the blueprint UI, this feature of a blueprint lock. So often you need to deploy certain infrastructure in a application team subscription where that application team needs owner access because they need to regulate RBAC themselves, and you need owner access to do that sort of thing at a subscription. So what the blueprint is going to do, it's going to add sort of a special type of role assignment called the deny assignment. And what that's essentially doing is revoking access from the owners of that subscription for these specific resources. So the classic example here is virtual networking. You need the VNet in that subscription, but you really don't want your application team mucking with things like IP addresses. And so with the blueprint, if you apply it that way, you can actually prevent them from touching those resources at all.
Oh, wow. Okay, very cool. Okay, does this make sense for us to get into a demo?
Yeah, let's get into a demo. That's the exciting stuff. So let's make that a little bigger. So blueprints are a top-level service in Azure, and all that means is that you can find it by opening up all services and searching for blueprints. At that point, you can pin it to the sidebar for easy access. So let's dive into what the actual experience is like.
Great.
So this is our getting started page. It really just goes over at a high level sort of the key pieces of what it means to create a blueprint, as well as some links to documentation. When I click create here, this is where you get to make that first choice of, do I want to make a blank blueprint from scratch, or do I want to start with one of these built-in blueprints?
And as we add additional ones like FedRAMP, they'll start to appear in here as
well. And as the library of blueprints goes, I'm sure we'll have more features around sorting and rating these things to weed some of the other ones out.
And I guess just a quick caveat for the astute observer, they may see that you're in regular Azure instead of Azure Government. So as a member of the Azure Government engineering team, I feel obligated to point it out that as the time of this recording, It's not in Azure Government, but we know that it's coming in a matter of weeks. So depending on when they're watching this video, that may already be here.
Right, yeah. So the key pieces are actually stood up in government right now. We're in the process of starting our FedRAMP certification so that all the government agencies can start to consume that.
Great.
But yes, this is the regular Azure portal.
With that caveat out of the way, please proceed.
So this is those two ISO blueprints. This is the one for shared services. So you might be familiar with the hub and spoke architecture. So the shared services is going to be your hub subscription or hub workload. And then this one is the ASC SQL workload. We work with some of the teams within Microsoft that are working with these customers to build out some of these archetypes and these workloads, we call them. This is the first one for app service and SQL, which is, of course, really quite a common workload.
Right.
But we expect to have more of these workloads also with the ISO compliance built into them.
Makes sense.
So we can just click Use this sample. And so we'll select the shared services environment. What we're going to be doing is essentially taking a copy of this blueprint that we store in the blueprint service and letting you essentially clone it into your tenant. And the reason that we do that is very rarely will you be able to take a complex environment like this, turn around and apply it, and have it do every single thing that you want it to do. You might have some custom tools for things like secrets or log storage or whatever it is. So we clone it into your tenant so that you can start to make changes to some of the key pieces. Of course, if you want to deploy it as is, it works really well and all the components work together, but we make it easy to swap some of these components out.
Okay.
So that's why I need to give it a name. So I'll say, this is my ISO blueprint. And then I need to decide where this blueprint is going to live in my tenant. So organizations are starting to get a lot more subscriptions. They're also starting to build out their management group hierarchy. So a management group, if you haven't started using it, is really a grouping construct for your subscriptions, and you can start to develop layers of your management group hierarchy, and that makes things easier to manage from an RBAC perspective or a policy perspective. And so by choosing where in my hierarchy I want to save the blueprint definition, that determines what subscriptions can take advantage of that blueprint.
It's like what's in scope.
Yeah, what's in scope, exactly. Great. So I will save it into our favorite organization, Contoso. And I'll switch over to the next tab, which is called the Artifacts tab. And this is really the meat of what a blueprint is. And since we're using a built-in blueprint, I have all of these artifacts that have already been added to the blueprint. So as you can see here, I have a bunch of policies for setting up the log analytics agents. I have a template for setting up Security Center. This is the key piece. We built a new policy specifically around ISO 27001, and we're continuing to add new policies to it to cover more controls of the ISO spec. So that's what that is. We have some more policies, again, helping you reach ISO compliance. This is all at the subscription level. And then as you can see here, I have resource groups being set up as well. So I'm creating a resource group for log analytics, and then I have a template that stands up the log analytics workspace there. Same thing for networking. I'm setting up networking in a dedicated resource group. Key Vault for secrets. My jump box, which is often required in a lot of organizations. And then Active Directory domain services. We're setting up a VM with ADDS on it. A lot of large organizations still need the full power of on-prem Active Directory or in a VM Active Directory. So that's why we're setting up full ADDS here.
Okay. So it's not just creating policies, it's even creating resources too. Like, we know you're going to need Key Vault to manage your secrets. We'll make sure that's set up for you.
Exactly.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so this is what I mean when you can start to make changes. So if I right-click on any of these artifacts, I can remove them or edit them really easily. So if I have a solution for managing logs and metrics that's not log analytics, that's fine. You can just swap those out. And you can add a new artifact just by clicking the Add Artifact button. And depending on what you want to bring in, you can bring in these different artifact types. So if I want to add a new policy, I can do that right from here. If I want to add a new ARM template to deploy a specific piece of infrastructure, I can do that right here as well.
So we might have an organization that says, we only allow MySQL, and you can add a policy saying, don't allow Azure Database.
Yep.
Because we want MySQL.
Yep.
And so it becomes a situation where the enterprise architect who previously tried to do Visio diagrams and said, please follow this, now can actually enforce the rules of the agency.
They can codify the intent of what they want these subscriptions to look, or these environments to look like. And this is the power that we're bringing to these cloud engineers, is they have full control over what things should look like, how they should be deployed.
Yeah. And I see there's actually an option there for Azure Resource Manager templates. So you really have a lot of flexibility in what you are creating.
Yeah, you really, anything that you can deploy in Azure, you should be able to deploy with a blueprint.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we'll do now is save this blueprint as a draft. The reason why we save the blueprint as a draft by default is so that we know people are going to be constantly tweaking what the shape of this blueprint should look like. When you're ready, you publish a blueprint and you say, this is the version of this blueprint that I care about. So I'll just right-click here and click Publish. We'll call this 1.0. This is my initial ISO blueprint. The reason why this version is important is so that we can track which versions have been applied to which environments. As you continue to update the blueprints, you're going to want to turn around and upgrade the environments that had this blueprint already. You may want to take an environment from Blueprint 1.0 to Blueprint 2.0 that has the extra resources or the new policies or what have you. And by understanding the difference between those versions, we can more cleanly upgrade them without running into errors and that sort of thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
When I'm ready, I can assign the blueprint. So I'll right-click here and I'll click Assign. Assign is the act of deploying the blueprint to an environment. So you'll see here the first thing I have to choose is which subscription I want to assign this blueprint to. So again, we talked about building out that hierarchy of scopes with management groups. These are all the subscriptions that are underneath the scope where the blueprint is saved. So that determines which subscriptions were eligible for this blueprint to be assigned.
So I can assign multiple subscriptions here in one shot?
You can, yeah. If you want to just deploy it all to all of your subscriptions, we make that really easy for you.
Okay.
So I'm just going to select one subscription here. And now I have to go through and fill out a few different fields. So the version obviously is important, and if you need to apply an old version, that's no problem. We store all of those for you. The next sort of two key decisions you're going to want to make are on the lock and on the identity that you want to use to deploy the blueprint. So the lock we talked about a little bit. You may need to deploy infrastructure into a subscription, but not let anybody who has access to that subscription mess with those resources. So you have two options here. You can set up a read-only lock, which will mean there's no operations you can do besides read on this particular resource, or you can do not delete. So sort of the canonical example here is like a SQL Server or an automation runbook, where you want to set up a sort of baseline SQL Server with a certain config, and you don't want people to delete that, but you do want people to spin up new SQL databases or new runbooks. And so with the delete-only lock, you have a little more flexibility there to do those sorts of things.
Okay.
And then the last sort of basic piece of a blueprint deployment is what identity that you want to use. So by default, we'll create a system-assigned managed identity, and that's how we can talk to the subscription where everything is being deployed. But it only has access to the subscription that you're talking to. So if you need to do anything sort of cross-subscription, so VNet peering is a good example of this, where you need to talk to the subscription that you're setting up, but also the subscription to the sort of hub VNet that might have something like an express route connection. And so there you would need a user-assigned identity where you get to decide what permissions it has and what subscriptions it can talk to.
Okay. So it's great that we provide guidance there on how you pick the appropriate managed identity.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a ton of flexibility. It can talk to whatever it needs to talk to get that deployment done.
Great.
The rest of this are parameters for the particular artifacts in this blueprint. So you'll see here that for the most part, we've defaulted nearly everything. So you have a few different things that you need to fill out in order to start the blueprint deployment. But for the most part, all the defaults are good defaults to get started with. So we have a whole bunch of parameters here. I'm not going to go through each and every one and fill them all out. But once I'm done, I can just click Assign, and that's when the process will start. And so it'll go through and say, OK, here's everything that's in the blueprint definition. Let me go through and deploy them in the right sequence, et cetera, et cetera. When that is done, I'll do my cooking show example here. I'll go to the assigned blueprints. These are all the blueprints that have already been deployed. And so I'll search for a previous ISO blueprint that I've already applied. And you can see here right at the top that the assignment succeeded. And these are all the different components that have actually been set up. So all the resource groups, the blueprint policy initiatives for ISO specifically, NSGs, storage accounts, VNet, sort of you name it. If you need it in that sort of foundational shared services environment, it's captured in the blueprint that's built in to Azure.
And for our customers where they're in agencies that have to provide documentation for their compliance officers, we help them provide that documentation.
Yeah, exactly. So when policies are running, they're emitting these compliance records that we store on your behalf. If you need to export them, you can certainly do that. But we give you a view for any given policy or any given initiative, which is a set of policies. We'll give you a view in terms of what is being flagged as non-compliant or what are the resources that are compliant.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, and so this is pretty much it. It's really quite easy to deploy these complex infrastructures, and we're really excited to keep cranking out these built-in compliance blueprints for other needs.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be hugely important for Azure Government, so thanks for joining us today. This has been Steve Michelotti with Alex Frankel, Program Manager on the Azure Governance team. Thanks for watching.